The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by any known species. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, a massive sphere of crystal and metal that could hold representatives from over 500 different worlds. Today, nearly all of those seats were filled. Ambassador Zither of the Valorian Collective walked slowly to his designated position in the senior section. His four eyes moved constantly, watching the other delegates as they took their places. He had served in this hall for over 300 cycles, longer than most species lived. He had seen wars begin and end. He had watched empires rise from nothing and crumble into dust. Very few things could surprise him anymore. The Valorians were an old race, one of the founding members of the Assembly. They had blue-gray skin covered in tiny scales, four eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on their faces, and two hearts that beat in perfect rhythm. Zither was considered ancient even by their standards, and his experience made him one of the most respected voices in the chamber. Today's session had been called by the Dravari Empire, which was unusual. The Dravari were warriors, proud and fierce. They preferred to handle their own affairs without involving the Assembly. For them to request an emergency meeting meant something significant was about to happen. Zither settled into his seat and activated his personal display. Around him, hundreds of different species were doing the same. The crystalline beings of Xylos glittered like living diamonds in their section. The Mindweavers sat in perfect stillness, their elongated bodies wrapped in flowing robes. The insectoid Krath clicked and buzzed among themselves. Each species was different, but they had all learned to work together over thousands of years. A deep tone echoed through the hall, signaling that the session was about to begin. The chatter died down as all attention turned to the central platform. General Varkos of the Dravari materialized on the platform. He was an impressive figure, standing nearly 3 meters tall. His body was covered in thick green scales that could stop most energy weapons. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and his mouth was filled with sharp teeth. He wore ceremonial armor that gleamed under the lights, decorated with medals and symbols of his many victories. Varkos stood straight and proud, his hands clasped behind his back. He waited until the hall was completely silent before he spoke. Honored members of the Galactic Assembly. His voice boomed through the translation systems that allowed every species to understand him. I come before you today with an announcement of great importance. The Dravari Empire has made a decision that will change the balance of power in this region of space. Zither leaned forward slightly. This was unusual language, even for the Dravari. They were always confident, but Varkos seemed especially proud today. For many months, our scouts have been studying a small system on the edge of explored space, Varkos continued. We have analyzed its resources, its strategic value, and its native population. After careful consideration, the Dravari High Council has decided to add this system to our empire. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Expansion was not forbidden by assembly law, but it was expected that members would inform the others before making such moves. This was a courtesy that prevented misunderstandings and conflicts. The system we have chosen is called Sol by its inhabitants, Varkos said. It contains 8 planets, various moons, and an asteroid belt rich in minerals. More importantly, the third planet from the star supports a native intelligent species. Zither felt his scales tighten. Sol. He knew that name. Every senior member of the Assembly knew that name, though it was rarely spoken aloud. These beings call themselves humans, Varkos announced. They are a young species, barely capable of traveling within their own system. Their technology is primitive. Their world is divided into hundreds of separate nations that constantly fight among themselves. They pose no threat to any spacefaring civilization. The general paused for effect, his yellow eyes scanning the assembly with satisfaction.
I'll set in 3 standard cycles.
The Dravari fleet will enter the Sol system. We will establish orbital superiority within hours. Ground forces will secure key positions within days. Within 1 month, Earth will be a colony of the Dravari Empire, and its people will serve our needs. Varkos crossed his arms over his chest, clearly expecting the assembly to react with concern or perhaps protest. He was prepared for arguments about territory rights and native species protection. He had rehearsed his responses to every possible objection. He was not prepared for what actually happened. The first sound came from the crystalline beings. It was a high musical tone that their species produced when something amused them greatly. Then the Mindweavers began to shake, their bodies trembling with what could only be described as silent laughter. The craft made rapid clicking sounds that their neighbors recognized as hysteria. Within moments, the entire assembly was laughing. Zither did not laugh. He sat very still, watching General Varkos with something like pity in his 4 eyes. Around him, species that had been enemies for centuries were united in their amusement. The sound echoed off the crystal walls and filled every corner of the vast chamber. Varkos stood frozen on the platform. His scales began to change color, shifting from green to a deep red that indicated extreme anger in his species. His clawed hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Did you dare to mock the Dravari Empire?" He roared, but his voice was nearly lost in the continuing laughter. Ambassador Prelix of the Mindweavers was the first to recover. She rose from her seat, her tall form unfolding gracefully. She was ancient, even older than Zither, and her mind was said to hold the memories of 1,000 generations. "General Varko," she said, her voice carrying easily through the hall as the laughter finally began to fade. "We do not mock you or your empire. The Dravari are mighty warriors. Your fleet is powerful. Your soldiers are brave. Then why do you laugh?" Varkos demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Prelix tilted her head, and her large dark eyes seemed sad. "We laugh because we do not know how else to respond. We laugh because the alternative would be to weep for you and your people. Weep for the Dravari. Yes, General, because you clearly do not understand what you are proposing. You speak of invading Earth as if it were a simple military exercise. You describe the humans as primitive and divided." Prelix paused. "Tell me, General, has anyone in your reconnaissance division actually studied the humans? Not just their technology or their military strength, but their nature, their history, their very essence as a species." Varkos straightened to his full height. "We have studied them extensively. They are weak. They are fractured. They will fall before our might, like so many others before them." The Mindweaver shook her head slowly. "Then your scouts have failed you, General. And if you proceed with this invasion, that failure will cost your empire everything." Zither finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the now silent hall. "She speaks the truth, General Varkos. Earth is not a world to be conquered. It is a world to be avoided. The humans are not prey. They are something far more dangerous." Varkos turned his yellow eyes toward the old Valorian ambassador. "And what would you know of war, diplomat?" Zither met his gaze steadily. "I know enough to recognize a species that should never be awakened. And I know that if you attack Earth, you will not be starting a war. You will be ending your civilization." Chamber fell completely silent as those words echoed through the vast space. The silence in the great hall lasted only a moment before General Varkos broke it with a harsh laugh of his own. He looked around at the assembled delegates with contempt in his yellow eyes. "You expect me to believe that a species that cannot even unite their own planet poses a threat to the Dravari Empire?" He shook his massive head. "I have conquered 17 worlds. I have fought against the best warriors this galaxy has to offer. And you want me to fear a race of soft-skinned creatures who spend half their time staring at glowing screens?" Ambassador Zither rose from his seat slowly. His old bones ached, but his mind was sharp. He had hoped this moment would never come, but now that it had, he knew what he had to do. "General, may I present some information that might change your assessment?" Varkos waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Speak, old one. But do not waste my time with stories and legends." Zithar activated his personal display and projected images into the center of the chamber. The first image showed a small spacecraft, clearly damaged, lying in a field of green plants. "This is what remains of a Corvani scout ship that crashed on Earth 60 cycles ago," Zither explained. "The Corvani, as you know, are a highly advanced species with technology that rivals even the Dravari." Varkos nodded impatiently. I am aware of the Corvani. What of this crash? The ship's crew consisted of 3 individuals. They survived the crash and were captured by the local humans. Zither changed the image to show a series of technical diagrams. Within 72 of their planetary hours, the humans had completely taken apart the ship's communication array. Within 6 of their months, they had built working copies and developed methods to block Corvani neural weapons. A murmur went through the assembly. Neural weapons were considered extremely advanced technology. Most species took generations to understand them. The Corvani have spent the past 60 cycles trying to understand how this was possible, Zither continued. They still have no answer. The humans simply looked at technology that should have been beyond their understanding and figured out how it worked. Varco snorted. One incident proves nothing. Perhaps the Corvani equipment was faulty, and let me share another incident. A new voice spoke from the upper levels of the chamber. Ambassador Gren of the Thornaki descended slowly toward the main floor. The Thornaki were a rock-like species, ancient beyond measure. They rarely spoke in open sessions, preferring to observe and record rather than participate. Gren's stone face showed no emotion as he took his place beside Zither. 200 cycles ago, the Solari Collective attempted to harvest Earth's oceans. The Solari needed large quantities of water for their breeding pools, and Earth had more liquid water than almost any planet in this sector. I have not heard of this, Varkos said, his voice slightly less confident than before. Few have. The Solari do not speak of it. Gren's voice was like grinding rocks. They sent 40 warships to Earth. These were not scout vessels or transport ships. These were fully armed military cruisers with thousands of soldiers aboard. And what happened? None of them returned. The chamber went completely quiet again. Varkos stared at the Thornaki ambassador with disbelief. That is impossible. 40 warships against a primitive species. The humans, at that time, had not yet developed flight, Gren said flatly. They were still using boats made of wood to cross their oceans. They had weapons that threw small pieces of metal at low speeds. By any reasonable measure, they should have been completely helpless against the Solari fleet. Then how could they possibly have destroyed 40 warships? We do not know. The Solari do not know. There were no survivors to tell the tale. The only evidence that the ships ever reached Earth are a few scattered references in human historical texts about strange objects falling from the sky during that period. Gren paused. The humans did not even realize they had fought a war. To them, it was simply a series of unusual events that they recorded and then largely forgot. Ambassador Prelix stepped forward again, her dark eyes fixed on Varkos. General, the humans have a concept they call adaptation. It means the ability to change in response to new challenges. Most species adapt over many generations. The humans can adapt within a single lifetime. When faced with something new, they do not retreat or surrender. They study it, they learn from it, and they overcome it. Every species adapts, Varkos argued. But his voice had lost some of its certainty, not like the humans. Prelix raised one long hand and projected new images. These are records from the last 300 cycles of human history. Look at their technological development. The images showed humans riding animals across dusty plains. Then the images changed rapidly, showing metal machines. Flying vehicles, massive ships, rockets launching into space. And finally, small devices that fit in a human hand, but contained more computing power than most planetary governments. 300 cycles, Prelix said. That is all. In that time, they went from riding animals to landing on their own moon. They went from sending messages on pieces of paper to creating a network that connects billions of them instantly. They developed weapons that can destroy entire cities, methods to cure diseases that killed millions, and machines that can think almost as well as living beings. Varkos watched the images flow past, his scales slowly shifting color. Their advancement is not just fast, Prelix continued. It is accelerating. Each generation builds on the last. Each discovery leads to 10 more. They do not rest on their achievements. They constantly push forward, driven by something deep in their nature that refuses to accept any limit. A crystalline being named Torvax moved forward, his body chiming softly. General Varkos, I served as an observer on the edge of the Sol system for 30 cycles. I watched the humans carefully, trying to understand them. Do you know what I found most disturbing about them? Tell me. They are never satisfied. Other species, when they achieve a goal, they celebrate. They rest. They enjoy what they have built. The humans do not do this. They complete one task and immediately begin working on the next. They cure one disease and start searching for the next cure. They build one machine and immediately try to build a better one. Torvax's crystals pulsed with colors that indicated deep concern. And most troubling of all, General, they do this while fighting among themselves constantly. Imagine what they could achieve if they were ever united against a common enemy. Varkos stood silent for a long moment. The earlier confidence had drained from his posture. He looked around at the assembled ambassadors. At the many different species who had all shared their warnings about the humans, it speak as if they are some kind of monsters, he finally said. Zither shook his head slowly. Not monsters, General. The humans can be kind. They create beautiful art. They care for their weak and their old. They form bonds of love and friendship that can last their entire lives. Then what are they? They are survivors, Zither said quietly. Their planet tried to kill them with ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, and disasters of every kind. And every single time, they survived. They adapted. They overcame. That is what they are, General. They are a species that simply does not know how to give up. General Varkos looked down at his clawed hands, then back up at the assembly. For the first time since he had arrived, he looked uncertain. I must consider this information further, he said slowly. This session is adjourned. He disappeared from the platform in a flash of light, leaving the assembly to murmur among themselves about what would happen next. Ambassador Zither had not slept in 2 days. His private quarters aboard the assembly station were filled with floating displays, each one showing different information about the planet called Earth and the species called humanity. The more he learned, the more he understood why so many civilizations had chosen to simply stay away from the Sol system. His young assistant, a Valorian named Keth, entered the room carrying a tray of nutrient supplements. The younger male stopped short when he saw the state of the quarters. Every surface was covered with data projections, images of humans, their cities, their wars, their inventions, and their art floated everywhere. Ambassador, you need to rest, Keth said with concern. You are pushing yourself too hard. Zither did not look away from the display he was studying. I cannot rest. Not until I understand. Understand what? Understand how a species so young could be so dangerous. Zither finally turned to face his assistant. His 4 eyes were tired, but they burned with intensity. Come here, Keth. I want to show you something. The young Valorian set down the tray and moved to stand beside his mentor. Zither adjusted one of the displays, enlarging an image of a large metal structure. Do you know what this is? Keth studied the image. Some kind of industrial facility? It is called the Manhattan Project. During one of their global wars, the humans developed a weapon capable of destroying an entire city with a single explosion. Zither's voice was quiet but intense. They did this in complete secret. They took the basic theories of their physics and turned them into the most destructive weapon their world had ever seen. And they did it in approximately 4 of their years. 4 years? Keth could not hide his disbelief. But the theoretical work alone should take decades. The engineering challenges would require at least another century of development. By our understanding, yes. By the understanding of every other species in the known galaxy, yes. Zither pulled up another display. But the humans do not follow our understanding. They needed a weapon, so they built one. They needed it quickly, so they worked day and night until it was finished. Time pressure does not slow them down. It makes them work faster. Keth stared at the images of the mushroom cloud that the weapon had created. This is terrifying. This is nothing. Zither switched to a new display. After they created this weapon, they did not stop. They immediately began working on more powerful versions. Within a few decades, They had weapons that could destroy their entire planet many times over. And do you know the most disturbing part? What? They built these weapons to use against each other, not against alien invaders, not against external threats, against other humans. Zither let that sink in for a moment. They have been practicing the art of killing each other for their entire existence as a species. Every generation they develop new and more efficient methods of warfare. They study their past conflicts and learn from them. They train their young to fight from an early age. Keth sat down heavily in one of the few clear chairs. Why would they do this? Because they cannot help it. Competition is built into their very nature. Zither moved to another display showing dense lines of text and images. This is something they call the Internet. It is a network that connects nearly all of their people instantly. Through this network, they share knowledge at a rate that would take our scholars many lifetimes to match. How is that possible? They live such short lives. That is exactly why it is possible. Zither sat down across from his assistant, finally showing his exhaustion. Each human lives for perhaps 80 cycles at most. They know from a very young age that their time is limited, so they waste nothing. Every moment is precious to them. Every opportunity must be seized immediately, because they may not have another chance. He gestured at the displays surrounding them. Look at what they have accomplished in just the past century of their history. They went from crude flying machines to landing on their moon in 60 years. They went from basic computers that filled entire rooms to devices that fit in their pockets and contain more knowledge than our great libraries. They developed new technologies faster than any species we have ever encountered. Keth was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had been shown. Finally, he spoke. If they are so advanced and so dangerous, why have they not expanded beyond their own system? Because they do not yet know the galaxy is waiting for them. Zither pulled up a display showing Earth from space, a blue and green sphere floating in the darkness. Most of them do not even believe that other intelligent life exists. They search for signals from space. They send out messages hoping someone will respond. But they have not yet made contact with any other species. The Corvani crash you mentioned? Covered up by their own governments, hidden from the general population. Zither shook his head slowly. The humans are good at keeping secrets from each other. It is another survival trait. They hide their true capabilities even from their own people. A chime sounded, indicating an incoming transmission. Zither accepted it, and the face of General Varkos appeared on one of the displays. The Dravari commander looked different than he had in the assembly chamber. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like worry. Ambassador Zither, Varkos said formally. I have spent the past 2 days reviewing the information that you and the others presented. I have also accessed additional files from the restricted archives. Zither felt his heart beat faster. The restricted archives contained information that even most assembly members were not allowed to see. And what have you found? I found enough to have questions. Many questions. Varkos paused, seeming to struggle with his pride. I wish to discuss this matter further with you. Privately. Away from the eyes of the assembly, of course. I will meet you in the neutral conference chamber in 1 hour. The transmission ended. Keth looked at his mentor with surprise. He is actually reconsidering, perhaps. Or perhaps he simply wants more information before proceeding. Zither stood and began shutting down the displays around the room. But either way, this is a good sign. If I can convince him to truly understand what the humans are capable of, we may be able to prevent a catastrophe. Do you really believe the humans could defeat the Dravari? Zither paused at the door, considering the question carefully. I believe that if the Dravari attack Earth, they will win the first battle. Their fleet is powerful, their soldiers are strong, and the humans are not prepared for an invasion from space. Then why are you so concerned? Because the humans will not accept defeat. They will study the Dravari, they will learn from their loss, and they will adapt. Zither's eyes were hard as stone. The Dravari would not be fighting a single war. They would be starting a conflict that could last for generations. And in a long war against an enemy that learns from every battle, the humans would eventually win. They always do. He stepped through the door, leaving his assistant alone with the weight of those words. Keth looked at the blank displays that had held so much disturbing information. He thought about the short-lived creatures on that distant blue world, creatures who did not know that they were being discussed by powers far beyond their understanding. He wondered if the galaxy was ready for the day when the humans finally looked up at the stars and decided to reach out. He suspected it was not. The neutral conference chamber was a small room deep within the assembly station. It had no windows, no decorations, and no symbols of any kind. Two simple chairs faced each other across a plain table. This was a place designed to strip away all the trappings of power and status, leaving only two individuals to speak honestly with each other. General Varkos was already seated when Ambassador Zither arrived. The Dravari warrior looked smaller somehow, as if the weight of his recent research had pressed down on his massive shoulders. His scales had lost some of their healthy green color, and his yellow eyes seemed troubled. Zither took the seat across from him without speaking. He had learned long ago that sometimes the best way to begin a difficult conversation was to wait for the other person to speak first. "I have questions," Varkos said finally, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "I will answer what I can," Stories told in the assembly. "The warnings from you and the others," Varkos paused, gathering his thoughts. "At first, I believed they were exaggerations. Political tactics meant to protect a primitive species for reasons I did not understand. Perhaps the humans provided some resource that the assembly wanted to preserve. Perhaps there was some economic interest I was not aware of." "That is a reasonable assumption," Zither said quietly. "But it is wrong. I know that now." Varkos leaned forward, his clawed hands flat on the table. "I accessed the restricted archives, the files that even senior assembly members rarely see. I found things that disturbed me deeply." "Tell me what you found." "The Kelvani Dominion." Varkos spoke the name like a curse. They were one of the most powerful military forces this galaxy has ever known. 3,000 years ago, they controlled over 200 star systems. Their fleet was unstoppable. Their soldiers were feared across the known universe. Zither nodded slowly. "I remember the Kelvani. I was young when they fell, but I remember, according to the archives, the Kelvani discovered Earth and decided to enslave its population. The humans at that time were using primitive metal weapons. They rode animals into battle. They had no understanding of technology beyond basic metalworking." Varkos's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The Kelvani should have conquered them in a single day, but they did not. No, they did not." Varkos stood and began to pace the small room, his tail swishing with agitation. The records indicate that the initial Kelvani landing force was destroyed within hours. Not defeated and driven back. Destroyed. Every soldier killed. Every vehicle wrecked. The humans suffered massive losses, but they kept fighting until no Kelvani remained alive. "The humans have a word for this," Zither said. "They call it total war. It means they do not simply fight until the enemy retreats. They fight until the enemy is completely destroyed, until the threat can never return." Ko stopped pacing and turned to face the ambassador. "The Kelvani sent reinforcements. More ships. More soldiers. Better weapons. And each time the same thing happened. The humans took terrible casualties, but they learned. They adapted. They figured out how to use the Kelvani weapons against them. Within a single human generation, they were launching their own attacks against Kelvani positions in space, using stolen technology. Yes, technology they should not have been able to understand for another 1,000 years of development. But they figured it out anyway." Varkos sat back down, his movements heavy. "The Kelvani Dominion no longer exists, Ambassador. 200 star systems, millions of soldiers, thousands of years of civilization, all of it gone. Wiped out by a species that had not yet invented the wheel when the conflict began." Zither let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking. "There are other examples in those archives."
"I know."
"I found them." Varkos pulled up a small display from his personal device. "The Velthari. They made peaceful contact with the humans approximately 40% of their years ago. They shared basic technology. They established cultural exchanges. They believed they were helping a younger species develop. And what happened? The Velthari are now what humans would call a client state of Earth, not through conquest, not through threats. The humans simply outcompeted them in everything. Erko shook his head in disbelief. The Velthari had thousands of years of advancement over the humans. Within 2 decades, the humans had surpassed them economically, technologically, and culturally. The Velthari now depend on human goods, human innovation, and human ideas to survive. The humans do not see other species as superior or inferior, Zither explained. They see everyone as competition, and they are very good at competition. It is built into their biology. Every human is constantly trying to prove themselves, to achieve more than those around them. When you give them access to new resources, new markets, new ideas, they do not simply accept them. They improve them. They make them their own. And then they sell them back to you at a profit. Varkos was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. My scouts observed that the humans spend much of their time on activities that seem useless. Entertainment, games, art, sports. They waste enormous resources on these things while their own people go hungry. Those activities are not useless, General. They are training. Zither leaned forward intently. Every game the humans play teaches them something. Strategy, resource management, quick thinking, teamwork, competition. Their entertainment is filled with stories of conflict and survival. Their sport. SR simulated warfare. Even their art teaches them to see the world in new ways, to think creatively, to imagine possibilities that do not yet exist. You are saying they are always preparing for war? I am saying they do not know how to stop preparing. It is who they are as a species. Zither pulled up his own display, showing images of human children playing with toys shaped like weapons, human adults watching stories about battles and heroes, human athletes competing with desperate intensity. From birth to death, they are constantly sharpening themselves, constantly becoming more capable, constantly ready for a threat that might never come. Barco stared at the images for a long time. I came to this meeting hoping you would tell me that the warnings were exaggerated, that the humans were not as dangerous as the assembly claimed. I cannot tell you that because it would not be true. I know. Varkos deactivated his display and stood. I must return to my people. I must speak with the High Council and share what I have learned. Zither stood as well. What will you tell them? The truth. That the Dravari Empire has chosen a target that we cannot afford to attack. Barkos moved toward the door, then stopped. Ambassador, may I ask you something? Of course, do you believe the humans will eventually expand beyond their own system? Will they join the galactic community? Zither considered the question carefully. Yes, I believe it is inevitable. They are too curious, too ambitious, and too restless to stay confined to one world forever. One day they will look up at the stars and decide to reach out. And when they do, what happens to the rest of us? Zither walked to stand beside the general at the door. That depends entirely on how we treat them when they arrive. If we welcome them as friends and partners, they could be the greatest allies the galaxy has ever known. Their energy, their creativity, their determination could help us solve problems we have struggled with for millennia. And if we treat them as enemies. The old ambassador's eyes were grave as he answered. Then the galaxy will burn, General. And when the flames finally die, the humans will be the ones left standing in the ashes. Varkos nodded slowly and stepped through the door. He did not look back as he walked away, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. Zither stood alone in the neutral chamber for a long time, thinking about the future and wondering if the galaxy was ready for what was coming. The throne room of the Dravar Empire was carved from the heart of a mountain on their home.
World.
Massive pillars of black stone rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Torches burned in iron holders along the walls, casting flickering light across the assembled military leaders. General Varkos stood at the center of the great hall, facing the High Council. These were the 12 most powerful warriors in the Empire. veterans of countless campaigns who had risen to rule through strength and cunning. At their head, seated on a throne made from the bones of conquered enemies, sat High Lord Dravos, supreme ruler of all Dravari. The silence in the hall was absolute. Every eye was fixed on Varkos, waiting for him to deliver his final assessment before the invasion fleet launched. "My lords," Varkos began, his voice echoing off the stone walls, "I have completed my analysis of the Sol system and the species known as humanity. I stand before you to deliver my recommendation." High Lord Dravos leaned forward on his throne. His scales were dark with age, but his eyes were still sharp and fierce. "Speak, General. The fleet awaits your command. 100,000 warriors are ready to bring glory to the Empire." Varkos took a deep breath. What he was about to say would either save his people or end his career. Possibly both. "I recommend we cancel the invasion immediately." His words fell into the silence like stones into still water. "Furthermore, I recommend we establish a protective zone around the Sol system and ensure that no hostile species makes contact with Earth for the next several centuries." The eruption was immediate. Council members roared with outrage. Shouts of treason and cowardice filled the ancient hall. Fists pounded against tables. Weapons were half-drawn before discipline reasserted itself. High Lord Dravos raised one clawed hand. "Out," and silence fell instantly. The old ruler's face showed no emotion as he looked down at his general. "You recommend retreat before a species you yourself described as primitive." His voice was cold. "Explain yourself, General, and choose your words carefully." "My lord, I have spent the past several days studying everything we know about humanity. I have accessed the restricted archives of the Galactic Assembly. I have spoken with ambassadors who have watched the humans for centuries." Varkos stood straight, refusing to show fear. "What I have learned has convinced me that the humans are not a species to be conquered. They are a species to be contained." "Contained? By what right does the Dravari Empire contain a lesser species?" "By the right of survival, my lord." Varkos activated a holographic display that materialized in the center of the hall. "This is the current technological level of humanity. Primitive by our standards. Their spacecraft can barely leave their own system. Their weapons would be ineffective against our armor. On paper, they should fall within days of our invasion." He changed the display to show a graph climbing sharply upward. "But this is the rate of their advancement. In 200 of their years, they went from basic steam engines to landing on their own moon. In another 50, they had probes leaving their star system. They are now beginning to experiment with theories that could lead to faster-than-light travel within the next few generations." The council members studied the display with growing unease. Even the most aggressive among them could see what the graph implied. "If we invade," Varkos continued, "we will win the initial battle. Our fleet will establish orbital control within hours. Our ground forces will secure their major cities within weeks. By any standard military measure, we will achieve complete victory." "Then what is the problem?" demanded one of the council members. "The problem is what happens next." Varkos pulled up new images showing human soldiers in various conflicts throughout their history. The humans do not surrender. When their cities fall, they retreat to the countryside and continue fighting. When their armies are destroyed, they form new ones. When their weapons are taken, they make more. They do not know how to give up. It is not in their nature. He showed images of ruined cities being rebuilt, of humans emerging from underground shelters, of resistance fighters attacking from hidden positions. Every civilization that has attempted to conquer Earth has faced this same problem. The initial victory means nothing, because the humans simply refuse to accept defeat. They will fight for years, for decades, for generations, if necessary. "Then we will kill them all," another council member suggested. "Eliminate the threat entirely. We have considered this option. It is not practical." Varkos changed the display again. The humans number over 8 billion individuals. They are spread across every region of their planet, including areas that are extremely difficult to access. They live underground, underwater, in frozen wastelands, and in burning deserts. Eliminating them completely would require resources we cannot spare and time we do not have. He paused to let that sink in before continuing. And even if we could eliminate them, we would face another problem. The moment we attack Earth, every species in the galaxy will be watching. Many of them are already afraid of the humans. If we destroy humanity, we prove that fear is justified. We make ourselves the target of that fear instead. Lord Dravos stroked his chin thoughtfully. You paint a dark picture, General. But surely the Dravari Empire is capable of handling a single primitive species. My lord, the Kelvani Dominion thought the same thing 3,000 years ago. They were one of the most powerful empires the galaxy has ever known. They controlled over 200 star systems. Their military was feared across the known universe. Varkos met his ruler's eyes steadily. The Kelvani no longer exist. They were destroyed by the humans. Silence fell over the hall again, but this time it was thoughtful rather than angry. There is one more thing I must tell you, Varkos said quietly. The humans are currently divided into hundreds of separate nations. They fight among themselves constantly. They waste their energy and resources on internal conflicts. We know this. It is why we believe them to be weak. It is actually why they are so dangerous. Varkos pulled up a final image showing Earth from space, the blue and green world floating peacefully in the darkness. The humans have never faced a true external threat. They have never had a reason to unite against a common enemy. If we invade, we give them that reason. He looked around at the assembled council members. Imagine what a unified humanity could accomplish. All of their energy, all of their creativity, all of their relentless drive, focused on a single goal. The destruction of the Dravari Empire. Varkos shook his head slowly. I have fought many enemies in my lifetime. I've never been afraid of any of them, but a unified humanity terrifies me. The council debated for many hours after Varkos finished speaking. Arguments were made for and against the invasion. Pride clashed with caution. Tradition battled against reason. In the end, High Lord Dravos made the final decision. The invasion was cancelled. The fleet was redirected to patrol the existing borders of the Empire. No explanation was given to the waiting warriors. It's only orders to stand down, far across the galaxy, in the halls of the Assembly. Ambassador Zither watched the announcement with quiet relief. The humans remained unaware of how close they had come to war. They continued their lives, their conflicts, their endless striving toward goals they had not yet achieved. Perhaps that was for the best, Zither thought. Let them remain innocent of the wider galaxy for a little while longer. Let them continue to believe they were alone in the universe, because somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between the stars, a young and hungry species was preparing to take its first steps into a galaxy that was not ready for them. And when the humans finally arrived, nothing would ever be the same again.